Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all keeping safe and well. So there's 4.5 hours to go now on this transfer deadline day. I've got another very, very special guest joining me today. Gerry Cox, the Managing Director of Hayters TV, also former Chairman of the Football Writers Association, former sports reporter with The Observer, and involved with many Tottenham Hotspur projects over the years, including the Spurs newspaper back in the day. Gerry, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And blimey, that's a blast from the past. Spurs news.
Do you know, Gerry, I'm a big Spurs collector, and a couple of months ago I picked up one of the newspapers and saw your name. How was it working on that publication?
It was strange. I was freelance. I was at Hayters just as a reporter back then, and the editor, John Fennelly, long-standing Spurs man. He's the he's now club historian pretty much, but he was the press officer. And he'd been at Hayters, as have one or two press officers and PR people at Spurs since. We've been a good production line for the Tottenham media staff. But he commissioned me to start writing the odd article, mostly interviewing players, sometimes down the training ground, or sometimes in those days you could just have a list of players' numbers, just ring them up and ring them at home. So it's great fun. It was a lot easier back then. You'd knock around with players a bit more. I remember Ilie Dumitrescu when he'd signed. His English wasn't great, but he wanted, I thought, well, I'll take him out. We went out to lunch in Hendon, a little Italian restaurant in Hendon, to put him at his ease. And it was great. You really develop good relationships with the players, and it was an enjoyable time. The trouble was writing for a club publication, everything had to be completely on message, and there would be I never knew who it was, but it wasn't John Fennelly who had the ultimate say so. I suspect it was someone who worked for Alan Sugar, who would occasionally put red pencil through anything that wasn't quite on message, so it's quite hard. And let's not forget, you're sort of going through the period of Ozzy Ardiles and Gerry Francis. They weren't glorious times for Spurs a lot of the time. So you're trying to write upbeat pieces as much as you can, but sometimes you've got to confront the fact that they weren't very good. And a lot of it used to hit the cutting room floor, as they say, or get spiked.
Gerry, before we move on to talking about the transfer window and obviously today's very, very busy day, tell the viewers a little bit about Hayters TV, because you, of course, go to a lot of the press conferences, ask Antonio Conté and previous manager questions, player interviews, etc. Tell us a little bit about Hayters.
Yeah, well, Hayters is it's an institution in sort of British sports media. We've been running 65 years or so. And I joined in the early 90s, 1990 full time, but I'd been there a couple of years before that, freelancing for them. And lots of the top sports writers and journalists started at Hayters, and people in TV now. So people like Des Kelly, you'll see Peter Drury. They were my contemporaries back then. Mark Demuth, who runs ITV Sport, he'd sat to my left and so on. So it was a great sort of stomping ground for journalists. And Nick Callow, who runs Hayters with me now, he was there at the time. And then we sort of came back into the fold a few years later and sort of took over the operation when old Reg Hayter had gone. The guy started it. Great sort of leader of journalists. So we've done that. And one of the things we do, we moved into TV early 2000s, really, because the market was there. And we started going to the training grounds and press conferences, the first non-broadcasters to do so. And we built up a strong sort of operation that does, a lot of these press conferences right across the country. But we're particularly strong in London, as you know, with Arsenal, Chelsea, Spurs as our sort of three of our strongest clubs. We've got a YouTube operation that's now got 350,000 subscribers, and we average about 1 million views a month, so that's going quite well. And Instagram's going well. Now we're moving on to TikTok. We've taken on a young lad who gets that. I'm way past the stage of understanding what works and doesn't on TikTok, but I it's good to have someone who does. So we're moving more into social media, but we still supply a lot of the traditional media with their coverage. I still write match reports for a couple of papers and bits and pieces, So it's changing times, but it's interesting times, yeah.
Well, you must have seen so much happen at Spurs over the years, Gerry. But let's talk about today's events, because in the last hour or two, Tottenham Hotspur have confirmed that Tanguy Ndombele has joined Lyon. Brian Hill has joined Valencia on loan. Giovanni Lo Celso has just joined Villarreal on loan. And we're expecting the announcement now of Dele Alli to join Everton on a permanent transfer. And of course, we've also heard the news of two signings for us, Dejan Kulusevski and Rodrigo Bentancur. What have you made of today?
Well, in the end, it's been a pretty positive window, you know. I mean, or positive day. we seem to sort of, as is Spurs' habit, you know, leave everything to the last minute. Sometimes it works out brilliantly. You know, the one that really springs to mind was Rafa van der Vaart. We were all over that one on the very last day of the window, and that was just fantastic business. And what a great player he was. But oftentimes, you know, you're going to leave yourself exposed, and you're probably not going to get the players you want. And I think, you know, let's not beat around the bush. Spurs haven't got the players Antonio Conte wanted, his first choice players. You know, Luis Diaz would have been one, Adama Traore probably one. Maybe they called on it a little bit at the end. But I think, you know, the two lads from Juventus, Bentancur and Kulusevski, clearly Paratici and Conte know them, like them. You hope they're going to be good additions because, you know, we've seen a lot of players come. Blimey, I mean, I'm going back to the aforementioned Ilie Dumitrescu and Popescu and Sergei Rebrov, and you know, I've seen a lot of players arrive from overseas with big names, big reputations, and just hasn't worked out for them. So you hope these two will. Tonge, we have to say, just hasn't worked out. You know, unfortunately, clearly a talented player, but we've only seen it in fits and starts. So I think that's a relief. You know, it's got to be good for him. Certainly, it's a fresh start elsewhere for him. Has got to be, you know, welcome. And you know, I don't suppose he'll be coming back to Tottenham. Really, it's a loan, and you imagine that will be made permanent perhaps in the summer. Lo Celso, you know, there were probably a few more flashes, but he just wasn't around enough. He was always injured. Brian Hill, I think, will be coming back. He'll hopefully be coming back a better player for getting more experience of playing. He's very highly regarded in Spain, so you hope he's going to come back with more experience and be able to hit the ground running next season. The one massive regret for me is Dele going, because I just loved Dele Alli as a player. I just thought he was fantastic. As a young player, he had everything, absolutely everything. And he had a swagger. He was a Spurs player, you know. And that song, you know, that was just perfect for him. And my memories of Dele are so strong. And to see that, you know, he just sort of declined in the last couple of years, and then to have to go and resurrect his career elsewhere, which I really hope he does, is just really sad, I think, because so many great memories. And he's still only 25, you know, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, but we just haven't seen the best of him in the last 3 years, really, at Spurs, and that's a real shame.
Gerry, the two signings that Spurs have confirmed, Kulusevski and Bentancur, do you know a lot about them?
I didn't know that much. I'll tell you what, I think they're going to be proper Spurs players, because I saw them play not long ago for Juventus in a 4-0 thrashing at Stamford Bridge. So that probably sets them up as proper Tottenham players. I don't
know whether to laugh or cry at that.
That was the last time. I mean, I was covering that Chelsea game, and that was probably the high watermark for Chelsea in the last few months, was that 4-0 win. They destroyed Juventus, and their biggest defeat in European football, I think, in the Champions League. So, I mean, listen, you couldn't tell much about the two of them on that night. They clearly are. Bentancur is a player he's well known, he's been around, and he's a solid player, isn't he, I think. But Kulusevski's an interesting one. I mean, I didn't know much about him before, but I've been reading up on him. Conte likes him. He established a great reputation in Serie A, and he seems to be the sort of player that actually will fit the bill at the moment, because he's a wide player. I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing right wing back, almost like Conte envisaged Adama Traore, perhaps. But he can play inside, he can play centre. You know, he's a right-sided player who cuts in on his left foot. So he's an interesting player, and he's got fantastic running stats. You know, I think he was voted Young Player of the Year in Serie A 2 years ago, and he had the highest running stats on average. So, you know, tailor-made for Antonio Conte, and I'd say a strong addition. I don't know whether Bentancur will be a like-for-like sort of Pierre-Emile Højbjerg style player. I don't think well, pretty certainly don't think either would have the creativity that potentially Lo Celso and Ndombele had. But then we haven't really seen that creativity from them. You know, the one player who also moved today, who's been the most creative player in the Premier League for best part of a decade, was Christian Eriksen. You know, Spurs clearly haven't replaced him. I mean, he's almost irreplaceable. Lovely to see him back, by the way. I mean, Brentford's my local club, and I started off covering Brentford as a cub reporter, so I've got a soft spot for the club, and I'm just delighted to see him back. But I think we're still missing that sort of creativity. You know?
Well, we could have replaced Christian Eriksen with Christian Eriksen on a free transfer. Would you like to have seen that, Gerry? Because I just think it's a no-brainer. You know, we've got Harry Kane still on the free kicks. I know Giovanni Lo Celso has tried the free kicks as well. We need that creative spark in midfield. And I just think that if Christian Eriksen is going to come back to the Premier League, I feel a little bit sad that he hasn't come back to Spurs. Do you?
Yeah, but I think no. I mean, I do. I'd love to have seen him back, and I'd love to have seen Dele back to his best. You know, because I was watching just the other week. There was a sort of Sky compilation of Harry Kane's first 100 Premier League goals, and almost every single one, you know, he's the first to celebrate and the first to put him through. The chances are created by either Dele or Eriksen, and they're the first around him when he's celebrating. You know, it's that little triangle at the front that was working for Spurs, you know. So, you know, they haven't replaced that creativity. I mean, Dele, don't forget, Dele was a great creative player. He's passing, you know, even if you remember, very, very clever little pass to Lucas Moura for the winning goal in Ajax, you know, that great night, the greatest night probably of recent years. That was Dele's lovely little feathered pass through. You know, he could do that. He was doing it for Harry all the time, and of course he could finish. So, you know, that's two massive creative players who scored goals and created chances that just haven't been replaced, and that's a real sort of hole in Spurs.
He will get a fantastic reception when he plays for Brentford for the first time, and that would be an incredible moment. Gerry, I want to talk a little bit about Dele Alli a little bit more, because we all expected him to leave in this transfer window. But I don't think a lot of us felt that or expected him to move on a permanent move. Are you surprised by this?
Well, sort of yes and no. I don't suppose it's a bit like, is a loan going to really do much to get him going again if it's just for 6 months or the end of the season? You know, it's not even 6 months, is it? It's 4 months, really. Would that reinvigorate his career enough to make him the player that Spurs want back, or to get him a bigger move somewhere else? You know, Everton are, without being unkind, Everton are fairly desperate to turn around their fortunes. You know, they've changed the manager quite. You know, that wasn't working, and Frank Lampard, I think, has got a real chance. I think he's a good manager. You know, and for Dele, to get Dele in there gives them much needed creativity in the middle of the park, and a goal threat. So he could certainly revitalize his own career there. It's not, you know, from a Spurs point of view, it's a lot less sort of painful for him to go to Everton than it would be going to, you know, some of the clubs that were mentioned in the past, you know, Chelsea or some of the big, you know, Tottenham's out and out rivals. So Everton isn't, you know, you hope he gets his career back on track, and Spurs could get as much as 40 million down the line. You know, 10 million when he plays 20 games and so on. So, you know, in the end, if they got all of that, that would be fantastic money. You know, that would be a good return on a what was once a world-class player. I said he was nudging world-class at one point, and potentially could still be a very, very, very good player. So to get 40 million isn't, you know, that would be good money for someone that hasn't been part of the plans for a while yet, recently at Spurs.
Is it time to start being really ruthless with this Tottenham Hotspur squad, rather than all of us being a little bit sentimental of wanting perhaps Dele Alli to come back?
Yeah, I think that's the truth, actually, because it's easy to get, as I said, it's easy to get sentimental. You look back on that sort of golden era under Poch, when Harry was scoring freely, and you had Eriksen, Dele creating. Even Eric Lamela was involved in a lot of those goals. You know, he's gone. Moussa Dembele's never been replaced. We know that. The wing backs haven't. Danny Rose and Carl Walker were playing essentially as wing backs. That system where Eric Dyer would drop back from midfield. They haven't been replaced as top class, absolute top class. Two of the best in the business at the time. And then Vertonghen and Alderweireld, the two of the best centre backs in the business for a while. So I mean, Spurs had players in positions where they were some of the best in the country, if not in Europe, and they've all gone. They've nearly all gone, apart from Harry. So Son is obviously is still an absolute top class player, and Hugo is obviously, that's a fantastic business. I think let's not overlook that one, because Hugo Lloris has been one of the world's top goalkeepers for a long time, and to keep him, seeing that he's absolutely still at the peak of his powers, that's important as well, I think.
Gerry, we've got just over 4 hours of the transfer window left. Do you expect any more signings in at Spurs?
I don't expect, it's Spurs, isn't it? It's Daniel Levy. You don't expect any, but you never know. He's probably, I'm going off to play football in a minute, but I'll probably have the phone not far away just to keep an eye on it. And when I come off the pitch, I'll be thinking, anyone yet? I think an out-and-out proper right wing back. But who is there? Again, maybe Trippier would have been the sort of player, absolutely. But I doubt, looking at the history when he revealed in that interview at the weekend about, they were trying to sell him long before the season finished, and those bridges are burnt, so he wasn't coming back. Who else is there? The one player I've seen that really impresses me, or in fact, the two wing backs are at Brighton. Tariq Lamptey and Cucurella. They both terrific players. Yves Bissouma is another good player at Brighton as well, but I don't think, having bought two midfielders, they'd buy another. Goal scoring cover. I think it really was the last minute. It was the 11th hour when they bought Llorente, wasn't it, from Swansea, I think, wasn't it? And just beat Chelsea to that signing. And actually, it seemed a bit of a strange one. He didn't really score many goals, but he actually was involved in those big moments, wasn't he? The one at City, the goal there in the quarterfinal, and then the semi-final. The knockdown eventually for the winner. So, he's they can make these very, very late signings. But I do think cover for Kane and a right wing back, an out-and-out right wing back, players they'd like to have now. Whether they think they can do it with the players they've got in, who knows?
Are you surprised though, Gerry? Because you mentioned Fernando Llorente there. That was the last striker that we actually signed on a permanent contract. Of course, we had Carlos Vinicius on loan last season, but that was back in 2017. Can you believe that?
Yeah. Well, it seems, what the problem with it is, obviously you're putting a huge amount of responsibility on Harry Kane. You're putting a lot of strain and stress on him because he has to play every game if you haven't got a like-for-like replacement. And when you've got the situation in the summer where he clearly wanted to go, where do you go from there? If you're going to then try and sign a forward, you're going to be paying top dollar because everyone knows the situation you're in. So it does seem strange not to have strengthened in the intervening years. Danny Ings might have been one, for example. I don't know if that had been was on the radar, but that's the sort of player that you think Tottenham should have been trying to find. But anyway, I am surprised, and we're lucky. You have to say Spurs are lucky to have Harry Kane. He's still a world-class player, and even he's not rattling in the goals at the moment, but you can see the signs he's getting back to his best, and he's a brilliant all-round footballer. He does everything. And I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves, not just, from the wider fan base, but, there are Spurs fans, not just those who sort of quite understandably took against him because of last summer. But I think there are some who still think, the big exotic foreign signing might be is a sort of player that excites Tottenham fans sometimes. And we sort of overlook those that have come through the ranks. And, there's a danger in a way that Harry Kane, when he does finally leave Spurs one way or the other, won't have been fully appreciated because, you were talking about the numbers are extraordinary. It's a bit like Eriksen, there were fans at the end who were going, wow, well off without Eriksen. All right, he might just downed his game might have dropped a bit in the last few months at Spurs, but my God, the numbers, the most assists, most goals from outside the area. He was the best creative midfielder in the Premier League for 6-7 years. So,
yeah.
I don't think we fully appreciated how good he was. I did. I loved him. I was a fantastic player to watch. Absolutely loved it. But I think there's a big part of the Spurs fan base that was sort of a bit so-so when he went. And I don't think we fully appreciate some of these guys, and you miss them when they're gone. Yeah,
no, I couldn't agree more. Gerry, Brian Hill's gone out on loan today to Valencia. Are you surprised by this move? Because he's made 20 appearances so far for Spurs. Most of them have been from the sub bench. There is no options included for Valencia at the end of the season. But we only just bought him. We only just bought him in the summer. Are you surprised?
Well, yes and no. Again, yes, it's odd that he goes out on loan so soon after being signed when he was sort of being considered as a possible starter. But given that Lucas is back in favour, Bergwijn seems to be sort of in favour as a wide stroke attacking player. Wide stroke central attacking player. Then it's going to be hard for him to get in, and Kulusevski takes another forward line wide position. So it sort of makes sense to try and get him some game time. I did say when he was, what was the last game? He was coming on for the last couple of minutes, the Chelsea away game in the league. He was coming on for the last few minutes, or doing his warm up. And I said, he's our Van der Beek, isn't he? He's getting sort of 5 minutes at the end of a game here, 4 minutes there, 2 minutes there. That's no good. It's not gonna get him, embedded into what English football's all about. And the Premier League is incredibly intense, and there are more experienced, better players really than Brian Hill, who've found it a tough thing to get used to. Look at Saul at Chelsea. He's completely overwhelmed by it. First 2 games he was taken off at half time. And so he needs to get blooded into football, but he's not going to get that time now at the moment this season with Spurs, I think. So put him back on loan, get him some minutes in his legs, get him his confidence up again. He's very highly thought of out there, isn't he? Spain, the national team like the look of him. And so I think, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think he'll come back feeling refreshed as having played a lot of football. And be a better player for it, and then he can start challenging for a position. You sort of think left-sided wide player. At the moment, it's Son, isn't it? Really, but it could change with the shape, So we'll see.
Gerry, are you worried at all about the squad numbers? Because Antonio Conte said a couple of weeks ago the squad was a little bit thin and it's not that big. With 4 players going out the door, with only 2 coming in, are you slightly worried about the numbers?
Not particularly now. I mean, I think Conte, what you really want is a first team that's good, and Tottenham's first team isn't bad. The first choice 11 are not bad. They can challenge, they can beat good sides, the best sides. They beat City in the opening day, didn't they? And Liverpool, they really should have beaten. And on their day, they're a good side. The first 11, then the depth drops. That's only going to be an issue, I think, when you start losing players to injury. And if you've got a couple of faces in to freshen up, and you've got the sort of players you want, it shouldn't be. You hope it's not going to be a big issue. You can't mitigate against the sort of injuries you might get. Hopefully, we're not going to see the same massive rise in COVID cases over the next as we move into the spring. I would say, I had this conversation in the office today with an Arsenal supporter. How a team that couldn't manage to get out 13 players start of this month of January, have then got rid of another 4 without bringing anyone in? It strikes me as bizarre what they're doing at Arsenal, because they said they couldn't play our game, and yet they just kept getting rid of players. But another couple have gone out on loan, so they must be running very thin, very down to the bones. And the new rules are you have to have 4 COVID cases to get a game off. So I don't know what's going on there, but no, I don't
Gerry,
think.
We don't care about them. We don't care about them.
I mean, listen, when we finally play that game, whenever it may be, I don't think the date's set yet, is it?
No.
You wonder if they'll have enough players then, because if they get a couple of injuries and call-offs, then it might come back and bite them, that one, mightn't it?
Gerry, what have you made of Ndombele and Lo Celso? Because, of course, Tottenham are quite heavily criticised a lot of the time about spending money, over £100 million on both of these players. And as I say again, I've said it a lot this week, you know, an incredible stat, 16 times combined between them, they have completed 90 minutes. That is not good enough. And as you mentioned about foreign players, and another question for you, is it about time that Spurs started looking at Premier League proven players rather than going abroad?
Well, to answer your second question first, I think that is a wiser move, unless you're really convinced that these players have got something you need, that they will adapt and they can do the job. Because I mean, listen, every club has got a track record of players who've come in from abroad and not really adapted. Some eventually adapt and some don't, but I mean, Spurs have got a long rap sheet in that respect, haven't they? I mean, blimey, look, you've only got to look at the strikers that failed to do it, you know, from, as I say, going back to Rebrov and then, oh God, you know, what was his, I've even forgotten.
Janssen, Soldado, there's so many, yeah.
Oh, the Dutch fella?
Janssen,
you know, I mean, they all look good before they arrived. They went looking terrible. So, you know, we've done that. Yes, you'd love to see players. I mean, I think when we recruited well, we were recruiting players who'd proven themselves at clubs like Southampton, you know, like Alderweireld and so on. You know, maybe that is the way to go. And you know, as I say, look at Brighton. They've established a couple of players there look really, really good. They've hit the ground running. And, well, I mean, Tarek Lamptey obviously came through the ranks at Chelsea. But Cucurella looks fantastic, you know. I mean, and Bissouma looks good. You know, those three would walk into the Tottenham team at the moment. So I mean, that would be the possibly the way to go. But then, you know, it's harder to get to prize players away from Premier League clubs that A are your rivals and B are wealthier than a lot of the European counterparts. So it is a difficult one to do. What was the first question about? Ndombele and Lo Celso. You know, that was a bad window, wasn't it? Jack Clark came as well, and
it was 518 days without a signing, and then of course Jack Clark was the first signing after all that period of time.
And I mean, I was told the suspicion was he wasn't Pochettino's choice whatsoever. Poch didn't want him, and he was back out the door as soon as he arrived. You know, and of course has hardly played a minute, has he? So that was just a wasted move for him and for Tottenham, you know. And then those two were meant to be the big two sort of landmark signings, and wow, they've really underperformed, haven't they? And Ndombele, you just saw flashes here and there, but you know, even his staunchest supporters, you know, people like the guys in the press box, you know, the guys who cover Spurs, and they're sort of fanboys. They love Conté, and you sort of say to them, well, when was the last time you remember him taking a game by the scruff of the neck, playing 90 minutes where you come away thinking, wow, you know, not in a Spurs shirt. I can't remember it. So yeah, it just hasn't happened for him. And you know, his body language, even, I don't know if you ever sort of hung around after the end of games, but when they do the warm downs on the pitch for the subs, whether they played a few minutes or they haven't played, you get a line of maybe 7 or 8 players out in the middle of the pitch. This would be, you know, half an hour after the final whistle, and we're sitting there waiting for the press conferences and so on. You'd have, you know, and Ndombele he'd still be sort of, you know, stumbling around, sort of slowly sort of ambling up and down. You know, the other Joe Rodon would be sprinting, trying to show that he's really fit and fast. And Ndombele's not putting, you know, shaking a leg in the warm down. So I'm guessing he's not really training at his best. He just doesn't look an athlete. He doesn't look an athlete. You know, the skill's there, but again, does he have skill that works in a team setting? That's my sort of concern. I sort of think of someone described him as like a cage footballer. You know, you see these guys who've got. I used to coach a youth team that my son was in, and there'd be one or two lads there who had all the tricks in the book. They could, they could do things with a football on the, when we train on a Tuesday night, they'd be doing some lovely stuff. They could do Rabonas and they could do these little step overs. When you put them into what we old school, you'd call the muck and bullets of a Sunday morning, muddy pitch, and it's 11 against 11, and you need organisation, you need someone helping each other out. They weren't the best players on the pitch. They were sort of passengers often, so those sort of tricksy players, as I call them, aren't necessarily what you want in a team game. And that's what, if you think back to Pochettino's greatest sort of achievement really was turning a squad of players, which had been full of individuals and a few egos, turning them into a really tight unit, band of brothers, that sort of thing. And in fact, when you said, is it time for a clear out, not be sentimental, I still recall, the best bit of business Pochettino did was after his first season, he sort of gave everyone a chance, gave them enough rope, and then he had a fairly ruthless clear out of the dead wood, the stuff that the players that had come in with the bail money and others just weren't good enough, and he got rid of them. And I think that allowed the younger generation to come through, gave them a chance. Ryan Mason spoke about it very well with him and Kane and Andros Townsend to some extent. And then, remember Walker and Rose were young players, and Eric Dyer came, and then Dele Alli soon after. These were young players who were given a voice because the young manager said, no, to hell with the big egos and the expensive signings. They're not gonna do it for us. I want you guys to do it for us, And that really, you could see then that tremendous spirit that team had. So that's, there is a time at every sort of refresh period in a club just to get rid of the dead wood, to say they're not quite good enough. Tottenham have made a lot of signings of players who aren't bad, but they're not quite good enough. I think probably a few more would have gone if they could have got the replacements in this window. We know, let's not beat around the bush. People like Doherty and even Emerson, maybe, doesn't look really up to it. And they could yet go in the summer. They could go in the summer if Spurs have a bit more time and to work in a proper transfer window and bring in the players they want. Then I think we could see a few more go out. Because Conté doesn't want players who aren't up to it hanging around the club. He works with a tight group and he wants them all focused. And he'll want a few more of his style of player in, I think,
Gerry, last couple of questions for you before you go. Do you think Antonio Conte will be happy with this window? If it closed this minute, will he be happy with the two additions and those other players going out the door? And do you believe he will be successful at Spurs? And with this current squad, can we finish in the top four?
So I think he'll be happier after today than he would have been without knowing what was going on a couple of days ago. He's got two players in that I think he knows about and would like in his squad. So he's got two players in that are good for him. He's got rid of three problem players that he just doesn't surplus to his requirements. And he's got a player out that he on loan hopefully will be coming back as a better player in Hill that I think maybe he thinks there's a future for him. I don't know about that, but so I don't think he will be unhappy. I think he'd be far unhappier if there hadn't been this business today. Have they got a good enough squad? As I said earlier, I think they've got a good enough first team and now a couple of sort of replacements and impact players, Stevie Bergwijn and maybe Lucas might become an impact player or Kulusevski on the right as impact players, which is an important factor, because Spurs are now very fit and you can see them running at teams, wearing them down with their fitness. And that's when you can introduce impact players who hopefully will finish games off. And that Leicester game the other day was a sort of throwback to early Pochettino. Spurs got fit, he got them super fit, and they had that never say die spirit. And that was, I remember when it started turning around for Poch was that sort of Aston Villa away and Hull away, late goals, late winners, equalisers, that sort of thing. And that's a big part of it. Fitness, being able to kill teams off in the last sort of 15, 20 minutes and going into the 95th minute, still strong. So impact players coming in. So I think Spurs have got a good nucleus now, 14, 15. Then it obviously gets a bit thin. So then the question about whether they can finish top 4 is all about keeping those players as fit as possible and as fresh as possible, because they will pretty much have 2 games a week now to the end of the season, given that they've got, a catch up to do. But out of Europe, I think it's a good thing, really. I think Conté had his best season at Chelsea when they were out of Europe. He could spend time on the training ground and get his ideas going. And their form under Conté is certainly puts them into the top 4 at the moment. Their form in the last 2 months, 3 months now, isn't it? Is top 4 material. So there's that. United have got a bit stronger and they've got a new manager bounce sort of thing. So they might be the greatest threat. I think West Ham probably will fall away a bit. They haven't significantly strengthened unless something, again, happens out of the blue tonight. And I think they will find it sort of starts to take a toll, because that is a small squad. And Arsenal, again, it's the squad size, and I don't think they've had a good window in many respects. So you sort of think Spurs are well placed to make the top 4. Yeah, I think they're well placed. It's not good enough. This isn't a squad that's going to challenge for the title. Conte can do a lot, but he can't work miracles. He's got to have additions to make them real challengers next season. So there will be more business to be done in the summer, without doubt.
Yeah, personally, Gerry, I'm expecting a very, very busy summer. Last question for you. Do you think Antonio Conte will be the man to lift a trophy at Spurs next? Because, for me, I can't see how we can go from Pochettino to Jose Mourinho to Antonio Conte, 3 fantastic managers, and not win a trophy. So is he the man? Is he the man to take us forward and lift that silverware that we have not lifted since 2008?
Yeah, well, he's the ideal man. I mean, he was a fantastic appointment. You had to pinch yourself to think we managed to get Conte after the disastrous appointment of Nuno. So yeah, and you just have to look back and think, what would have happened if they'd have got him back in the summer and given him money for signings back in the summer? Spurs could be comfortably top 4 and even pushing for second, third, even at the moment. So that's, you can only look back, but he clearly is. He's a man who knows what he wants, and is a top coach. So he could do. Just a little stat, just something just before coming on air, because it does, this notion that Spurs haven't won a trophy, they're not alone in that. There are 5 clubs who have spent in this century, let's say this century, but you're going back a while. 5 clubs that have spent more than anyone else on wages, transfers, So you've got Man City now, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, and Arsenal. Always big spenders. Arsenal probably dropped off a bit, and their accordingly their success has dropped off. But in the period since Spurs won the League Cup, only Birmingham and Swansea, out of that big 4, have won that competition. In the league, only Blackburn, who were big spenders back then in '93, and Leicester have won the Premier League outside that big 5. And in the FA Cup, you've got Portsmouth, Wigan, which, both of those were really sort of offbeat things, and Leicester again, and Everton. They're the only ones who've won the cup, the FA Cup, since Spurs last won it in '91. So the notion that Spurs are somehow this oddity because they haven't won a trophy, most of the clubs below the top 4, 5 haven't won a trophy. It's not just Tottenham. If you're not spending that super money, you're not going to win trophies unless you get very lucky, like Leicester did, or Wigan in a one-off game in a cup final, Birmingham against Arsenal in the League Cup final. They're sort of one-off games. But in terms of what's there on offer, of course, the big spenders, Man City, Chelsea, United, Liverpool, and less so Arsenal, are going to be snaffling them up. You know, they are winning all the trophies because they spend all the money. It's not rocket science in a way. Someone said to me at the start of the season, I think when Chelsea won the Champions League, you know, it's amazing, isn't it? Chelsea keep changing manager, yet they keep having success. What do you think that's down to? I said, well, you spend $1.5 billion on transfer fees. You should have some good players. You know, the best players and a good coach will win trophies. We've had some really good players. We got an exceptional group together. We should have won the trophy in that peak Poch period, yes. And we've had some, you know, we've had one brilliant manager. We had one famous manager past his best, and we've got another top manager who is still at his peak. So you'd hope a trophy will come along sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Gerry, I keep saying last question, but I've got to ask you this. I could talk to you all day about Tottenham. Pochettino, Jose Mourinho, and Antonio Conte. In your press conferences, having spoken to all three of them, who's been your favourite and why?
Oh, without doubt, Poch. I mean, loved Poch. I'd love to have seen him back. I know he was thinking about it in last summer. You know, I just love the man because, you know, he brought back everything. I grew up supporting Spurs. All those attributes, you know, entertainment, passion, success. You know, I mean, it wasn't a trophy, but that was a period of sustained success. It was just a joy going to Spurs again. You know, that season unbeaten the last season at White Hart Lane, you know, it's just an absolute pleasure going into the ground every time. The anticipation of going into a game thinking you're going to see great football, you're going to see great players, you're going to see goals, and hopefully you're going to see victory, you know, and this was week after week after week, and it went on. So those memories, I mean, those extraordinary, and it was his force of personality, and he was a great character, you know, great guy. Really, you know, just that there was a personal touch. I mean, it's been difficult in lockdown and everything else, but I mean, I covered Chelsea under Mourinho and Conte when you were, you know, you can mix with them, you can spend time with them. But Pochettino has a charisma about him. You know, that's why players responded so well to him. So without doubt, I mean, absolutely the best of the three. I mean, Jose could give you some fantastic sound bites. You know, he's an entertainer, but, you know, got all the other stuff that goes with him, you know, and unfortunately it just wasn't. I wrote a piece the day he was appointed for the Irish Examiner saying why it was the sort of, will he be a success or Spurs or will he not? I was the one saying no. And, you know, 2 years on when he was sacked, it was sort of, I told you so. They ran a sort of rag out of that column and sort of, yeah, just everything had panned out exactly as I'd said. You know, they'll be close to trophy. There'll be flashes, but it'll all go sour and it'll fall out and start playing. You know, and all we know it's all going to happen, and it did. So 2 disastrous appointments in a row, really. I think they got it right now.
Well, I didn't even mention Nuno Espirito Santo, did I?
Oh, yeah.
I've forgotten about him already.
It was underwhelming, wasn't it, from the word go? And, you know, when you, that's last summer, you're sort of thinking it could be Poch. It could be Poch. You know, I know someone close to the club who close to what's going on and who said, yeah, they're talking. He's interested. It's the sticking point is whether PSG will let him go. So you go from that to Nuno's like, really? You know.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, you look at now, you could look at sort of what Graham Potter's doing, and you think, well, he wouldn't have been a bad one, perhaps, you know. But getting Conte is a real stroke of luck. So, you know, let's support him, hold on to him. You know, let's hope he gets supported in the transfer market and get some encouragement. You know, because I think he's top drawer, and hopefully that will start bringing the success back.
Well, Gerry, I can't thank you enough for all of your time. And as I said, I could talk to you about Tottenham all day long. So thanks so much for your time this evening. And hopefully you can come back on the channel very soon.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure, Chris. And yeah, like you, we'll be looking out for the last few hours of the window, seeing what's happening. And you never know, you know, another band of art might be lovely. Might be nice, wouldn't it? Oh, I think Aubameyang's deal at Barcelona fell through. So there's a bit of cover for Harry Kane, you know, maybe.
Oh. Well, Gerry, just before we go, tell everyone where they can find you on social media.
just Hayters TV on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok now. We're on Twitter. I did a Gaza goal on Twitter the other day. It got 2.5 million views. It was like,
wow.
Because I mean, distraction this one, but someone posted a lovely 140-second compilation of Gaza's 19 official goals in that season 1991. And Gary Lineker, he liked, I mean, I know Gary, and he liked it. He said, this is fantastic. And I replied saying, I think you've missed one out, because I remember Danny Blanchflower's testimonial. And I thought, Gaza took a Rabona penalty, didn't he? And just to sort of confirm it in my own mind, I looked it up on YouTube, and there it was. It was like no commentary. It was just the whole 90 minutes. I think it's a Spurs fan who put it up. So I just clipped out this Rabona penalty, because I thought, people didn't even do Rabonas in this country in 1990. And there's Gaza. And it's an unstoppable penalty. I think it was Chris Woods in goal. So I put the clip up, and it just went like wildfire, because no one had ever seen it. And you think there's a younger generation still, you've seen glimpses of Gaza, and you've seen some, I mean, amazing stuff. But to see him, I know it was a testimonial, but wow, the delivery was sensational. So yeah, look at Gerry Cox on Twitter. That got quite a few responses, a little Gaza goal.
Well, Gerry, you've had some fantastic feedback from everyone in the comments today.
Okay.
So cannot wait to have you back on the channel. And let's hope that it is a busy few hours again for Spurs, and we get a Rapper van der Vaart moment. Wouldn't that be nice? Thanks for watching, everyone. And I'll see you on the next video. I'll be live at 9 o'clock with some very special guests yet again. I'll see you then. Come on, you Spurs.